So tonight we're going to be talking about this book, and I really can only claim so much credit. We had a gentleman who does. I don't quite understand everything he does, but basically he works in graphic design work and does a lot of other things locally. And he's really the one who put this together. But what I thought I would do is I'd kind of go over a little bit of what we put in the book and give you kind of an overview as far as I understand of what he did. Because I guess the first key lesson is find someone in your area who really knows what they're doing and enlist them. You learn in, all the trainings you'll go through, you learn to delegate. Well, delegate to someone who knows what they're doing is my advice, because he made this so easy. I mean, I just couldn't believe how easy this was. We had talked a little bit about doing some sort of book or something locally, and he had kind of a concept, like, well, one or two pages of like, well, we could do a format kind of like this. And it went from that to completely done within a month, and then maybe another couple weeks of kind of just a little bit of refining stuff, which was just shocking. One, I just want to give him a little bit of praise here for this cover, because this cover turned out great. He knows how to do all these Photoshop things, and he was able to kind of take the design of the Indian head patch, and he was able to kind of make it all look wavy and stuff. And I've heard that Greg Grimes has volunteered to help anyone else who needs to do this kind of work. So the first thing that he put into the book that I liked is he kind of consulted with what is our kind of published council history, which is what's on the website. That we've got a pretty extensive one on the council website. And then he supplemented that by reaching out to other local scouters and to Andy Stevens and a couple people. And this Jerry Neal is the one who did so much work on this. And so basically and I provided him, like, that's from a brochure that I have from 1924 from the camp, and he got some images, that's from a paper, and he was able to go through and basically just insert the history, chronological order kind of thing. And I'll give everybody the link, and you can read all this if you want to. And this is something that if we do future editions, we can just add to it, and kind of continue to flesh it out. But I do think it's good to have some sort of little council history in if you're going to do a book on local scouting. And so then over here, and actually he's pictured, he was one of the ones who gave the Georgia flag back to their governor after the Halifax track, I think it was, it was a Halifax track. Jerry Neal. So I think that's him right there. A number of years ago. So then we had just kind of a history of all the different scout executives up to current. We are one of the very few councils, as far as I know, the only council in the country that has had a scout executive, at least within recent times, has had a scout executive elevated to the scout executive position from the district executive position. We lost our scout executive during the 100th anniversary year. And so they decided we needed someone who kind of already knew what was going on with everything, and it was someone who was eligible to become a scout executive. And so essentially we had a DE become the scout executive and stay within our council, which is very uncommon. So went over a couple buildings at camp and who donated, and just things like that, and more council history. So we'll kind of get into... So this is where it started getting to be more about some of the collecting terminology, and you can kind of start looking at that. And basically we started with, we wanted to do shoulder insignia from the area. And basically on the left, what you have, and it's simplified in a table. And I'll tell you, if you can put information in a table that makes it very clear to people who want to get into collecting, do it. Because if they have to read paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs and then try to summarize it in their own head, it just makes it hard. It's a lot easier if you can just lay out the information in a basic table. Like, They can read the other information, but if they can consult it, they're good to go. So this talks about all the different color community strips, and a lot of this information really came from Mitch Reese's book and then some supplemental information I knew. And so then it also goes into, shows a couple of pictures of examples. And we consulted the Counselor Shoulder Insignia guidebook. So there's the, ISCA puts that out. And then there's also a Jamboree shoulder patch guidebook, because the ISCA Council Shoulder Insignia book, at least I don't believe the current one lists any of the Jamboree stuff. So because Jamboree Council strips are not, JSPs don't fit in with CSPs and SAPs, I guess, to some collectors. I've never quite understood all that, but I think it's a division that goes back quite a ways. Anyway, we consulted those and used them as kind of a good guideline to go based off of, but we had a number of issues that were not in either book. And then we also knew that a lot of them were out, and some of the stuff was out of order, and some of the information wasn't right and stuff. And so we knew that we had to do some more work to build on that. So this is what he essentially came up with. And my understanding, and this is the part that just blows my mind, and this is just incredible, is so he created this template page, okay? And this is where you kind of need someone who really knows what they're doing. But he created one page, and then he created an Excel spreadsheet that we could work in. And so the Excel spreadsheet has basically a field, and every field has, whether it's pre-1972 or the council ID number, and I'll explain that in a minute, or it has the ISCA guide code, or it has the descriptor, okay? It has all that. The thing is, all that was in a spreadsheet. And then he had a file folder that had images, and basically he was able to take the one template page and populate it with all the information from the Excel spreadsheet. He didn't have to make every one of these pages on its own, one at a time. He took the template page and it was able to pull the images, as long as the images were in order and everything. He had to have them set up right, but they were, just pulled the images from a folder, and they pulled every field from the Excel spreadsheet, and it created, just like that, all the pages of the book. I mean, to me, that was just awesome. I didn't know you could do that. I mean, I'm not the most technology, I'm sure some people think I know my way around technology. I really don't know my way around technology that well. And I just thought that was so cool, because when I had worked on doing a lodge book in the past, I had to sit there and make every single page and do every image a certain way, and and type everything on every. It was such a mess. This way, all he had to do was he created the Excel spreadsheet. He knew what fields he wanted. We filled it in. We got everything in order. He sent it back and forth between the couple local collectors who collect this stuff. And we made our additions or made changes or did whatever we did. And it was done. And if he was missing a scan, he told us, and we got him that one scanned or whatever. And it was done. That was basically, you just had to set up the template page. And I just thought that was just so phenomenal. But you need someone who's used to working with PDF documents and used to working with this stuff. So I do want to address this. I thought this was something we discussed quite a bit when kind of coming up with the guide. So you'll notice some of these issues that we put in the kind of the collector code down here, like S1A for the first issue, which is what it's referred to in the ISCA publication. So we put that information in there for people who kind of more sophisticated collectors, right? However, I told him, I said, look, the code stuff is kind of confusing. I said, who are we making this guidebook for? And this is one of those things of think of who your audience is. And in my mind, our audience was the scoutmaster who's been out at camp for 20 years. And he's accumulated some patches and he wants to put his patches in order. Or he doesn't remember everything about some of them and he wants something to kind of be able to look at them and explain them to his son or his grandson or, whatever. But it's for the local people who just want to get their stuff in order. And maybe to know what they don't have, just even if they're not going to get it, even if they can glance at it. And so my thing to him, because I told him, I said, we need to have a council ID that is fairly simple. And he sent me something back and it had letters and it had numbers and stuff. I said, no. I said, you and I are collectors and we're used to understanding an S1 and S2 and S3 or, a Z or all these different things. The average guy out at summer camp, he's not quite that sophisticated up on the nomenclature. So we just came up with simple numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's not hard. Put your patches in this order and they're in order. And so that's what we did. Starting with the red and white half strip, we started at 1, and we went through 2, 3, 4, and we didn't even, you could have said something like, well, do a 3A, 3B for the variety ones. Well, we just did them all single whole numbers. And I'll kind of explain it in a minute. If for some reason we find one later that we didn't know existed, which is quite possible if you know our council, we could go back in and do a half number somewhere so that it doesn't throw off, we could do a 3.5. We could do that. It'd be just as easy for us really to renumber the whole thing because it's all in an Excel spreadsheet. But if we wanted to make it easier on people who were already using it, we could use a half number. So let me come down to, and this is really more an overview on kind of our thought process with the book and things like that. I will say this is how good he was in Photoshop. He took this picture and none of the local collectors have this patch. We know it exists. I have a picture of it that's real grainy, but none of us have that patch. And so he took that picture and turned it into that picture. I thought he did a pretty good job. But it's just the same patch, but with blue versus red lettering. So let's see. And I may, if we have a little bit of time at the end, I may cover some of the more interesting issues from some of these. But I really want to kind of just cover the overview of what we were doing. So we got into variations some. Most people who are the very casual collector, they probably don't mind picking up the occasional variety since it's their own council, but we didn't want to go too much into the weeds, so we just kind of did a little section of them at the end. And we kind of explained what a variation was, and we showed some pictures of the different backings, that you could find on them. And, we did, the only kind of thing we did that was a little weird with the council ID. So, we're up to 170 issues, which just blows my mind that the council's made that many patches, but we're up to 170 issues. We did put in RPI. That's the only kind of thing that's different from a council ID. And what it is recognized private issues. At least down here, and I don't know how it is in every council, or, there had been a number of times that, we sent kids to the World Jamboree. Here in 95, 2007, 2015. And then they went to the Nord Jamboree, but they did that and they did the National Jamboree. It was something they did that year. that one, I don't really know a lot about that as much as I do the World Jamborees. But when they did the World Jamborees for North Carolina, they essentially made these council strips, and it was really because the World Jamboree contingents were done on the regional level. They were made by the region. They had nothing to do with the council. The councils were not consulted. The councils weren't asked. Nothing to do with the councils. But if your council had a boy going, they made a council strip for every single council. And so they've done it 3 different times. But it was kind of an official thing because it was done by the region, and okay, but at the same time, it wasn't, the council had no say in them. And inevitably, of course, some of these are very difficult to come across later and command a big price tag, and people can get a little upset about some of them. So anyways, we considered those recognized private issues. We consider these to be more or less official, and we would encourage you to collect them, kind of thing. And then we did unrecognized private issues. And so these are some of the questionable ones. We had a troop 25, and they called themselves the Little River Outlaws, and there was a big stink in the council. They made their own council strips, and they weren't supposed to because they were a troop, and troops weren't supposed to do that in our council. And so, they had those patches. And then here's one. A lot of y'all may remember Rick Pridgeon, and Rick was great. He took these, and this patch normally has beads hanging from it. And so he wanted to sell them as a fundraiser to raise money for Wood Badge. And he didn't want the people who were buying them as a fundraiser patch to have the exact same patch as people who had to be on the course to get it. So he cut the beads off of all the patches and sold those as a fundraiser. So, any patch with the beads you could cut off and you would have this patch. And so we did stick it in there because every now and then it will come up where someone will say something like, well, mine doesn't have beads on it. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't because Rick Pridgeon cut them off. But I remember him doing that. He did that at it was a Merit Badge College event or something like that the council ran over in Mount Olive. And then there was this one that there's still controversy going around with this, and some of them were stolen, or at least they walked away from the council with the district executive, and then turned out maybe the council has some left in the closet, and there's just lots of drama with it. So it's been stuck here, kind of awaiting any further information. The one thing I will mention, or one or two things, just kind of wrapping up some our thought process. We stuck, if it was a FOS, if it was whatever it was, NYLT Jamboree, to us it was all the same. We stuck them just in the order we knew them to exist in. Of course, there were a couple issues. This patch, which says supports our armed forces, no one knows what it was made for. The council doesn't know what it was made for, and they have some of them left in the back of the council office, and they don't remember what it was made for. No one has a clue. We didn't know it existed until I happened to trade for one at a conclave from someone who just showed up with it. And they were like, well, I think my dad got it, and he didn't remember where, I asked him, he didn't remember where. So we don't really know what it was made for. At the same time, we were told from the council, they kind of told us that they had a 2018 popcorn patch, but no one's ever seen it, or no one knows what it is. And somebody said, well, could it be this one? But every other popcorn patch has something popcorn related on it. So we did, we took a little bit of, we left a spot because the council says they made one, and we stuck this one here because it was our best guess. So, some of this you just have to kind of do as best you can. But, that's, our council is very small, 4 counties, and we don't have very many patch collectors. And our council has always been very restricted in a lot of the patches they've made. And if you didn't earn a patch, you didn't get it. It was just almost impossible to get. I mean, like the popcorn patches, of all the council strips I'm missing from my collection, almost everyone I'm missing, I think every one I am missing is a popcorn patch. Because I didn't earn a popcorn patch because I was an adult. And they were only available for youth. and they have just been impossible to get. So anyways, I hope that kind of covers this. Does anybody have any specific questions? Would anybody like me to cover any more aspects of this or anything else that went into the thought process of it? Or would anybody like me to cover any of our council issues? I'd be more than happy to do that. That's kind of a good question. So there's one issue that is not pictured in here. Come to think of it, I didn't even think about that really. If we had an official prototype, it would have come under here under recognize. Well, it's not a private issue, but prototypes are weird. I don't know that we would want to list it in with all the other ones because it's not something that people can realistically collect. We might would have had to make another area for it. We probably would have just stuck another page on somewhere right in here with the private issue stuff and just made a note for prototypes. There is one of these patches that I have seen the picture of in the council for, I don't even know, 10 or 15 years I've seen the picture, and I don't know who has the patch in question. I'm sure somebody does because the picture had to come from somewhere, but it is that patch, which is just the regular patch with a red border. And people have occasionally, somebody at some point called it a prototype. I'm extremely doubtful. For those who know, and there were some of those patches that kind of got rebordered, and there were some people who were doing that kind of thing and then trying to get a lot more money calling them prototypes, and they were just rebordered of regular issues. Somebody just yanked the border off and remarrowed them. So we didn't list that one because we're really, one, not sure where it is, or if it even, for all we know, it couldn't, the only thing anybody around us has ever seen is a picture of it. And it's also very questionable on even what it is, how we would list it.
Why are some dates and text in red on Steve Speeds? Eric Ross asked.
Okay, so let's see. So like that is red because this is one that says we believe to be issued in 2022, but we really don't know. So that's on that one. Just because we really just don't know. This one, we were told by the council that they made at least one patch for 2018. No one locally has, which is not a big surprise because none of the local collectors, most of us are missing most of the popcorn patches. I'm not the only one. And so if we kind of weren't sure of information, that's probably what you're seeing in red. I don't think there was a lot in red. And there were some weird things that we gave the best information we knew. So like this is a really difficult patch. They were given out. You could earn one. They weren't given, that you had to earn one, and it was for commissioner service. And the thing is that all of those were destroyed at one point when the council office flooded. There was a hurricane, flooded the council office. The entire council office was gutted, thrown in a dumpster. Turn around, and they reordered it. And as far as we can tell, the patches are basically the same. So we listed them as the same issue, even though the reordered ones came out several years later than the original order. So, some of this was the best information we could come up with. So there's two different ones. Here's one. And so you've got the participant that had 2 dangling beads, and then you had the staff which had 3 dangling beads. And this is the one, the what we called the Council ID 33 or SA 22. That's the one that Rick was nicking off the beads off, and they were selling as a fundraiser for the course and everything. And our council, for a long number of years, when Craig was in charge, starting back here, this was Craig's course, the Black Ghost one. But they really pushed fundraising for Wood Badge so that they could try to keep the cost down to allow as many leaders to go through the program as possible. That was a really big push from the Wood Badge, a couple of people on like the Wood Badge staff and so on. Now we did a very similar set of patches here, which was the next course, which had still 2 beads and 3 bead, a participant and a staff. And as far as I know, none of these were cut off or anything, and sold. And generally, and it was a big deal in the council to be able to even buy one of the Wood Badge council strips, because other than that one, I'm not sure that any of the Wood Badge council strips, other than the ones Rick sold, I don't know that any were allowed to be sold to anybody that was not on the course. And if you were on the course, you could buy the participant, and if you were the staff, you could buy the staff or participant. But that was it. They didn't sell those to anybody who was not involved. And same thing with the NYLTs. You could only get the NYLTs if you were on the course.
Doug had a good question. Do you know how that template works? And can the formatting be used for other books?
So I believe the format could be used essentially for anything. You would just have to tweak what you want the fields to be, and as long as these dimensions worked to show the image in enough detail, like if you said, well, I want to do neckerchiefs, well, the neckerchiefs might not fit in this block well, but you could create a similar template to do something like that. As far as I understand, it's a way of going into a PDF document, and I'm sure as something you probably have to have the paid version of Adobe to do it. But you can basically set fields that will pull, import from another document, and so you're importing it from the Excel spreadsheet. Now, does anybody in the group know what's the deal with the division of, I mean, I'm just kind of curious of like JSPs being handled differently by ISCA compared to CSPs or SAPs or whatever the other Ps are.
Councils were just making a CSP. It was just for council where it replaced the red and white strip, community strips and so forth. And there weren't any events. And so it was a standard CSP. And the initial books came out listing those. And then along the way, a few councils started issuing patches for other purposes, for events. And so the big one, of course, was jamborees. And kids tend to collect the jamboree that they attend. And so people were collecting jamboree patches separately from CSPs. And I think some of the purists, you could call them snobs if you want, but we'll say purists that collected CSPs thumbed their noses a little bit at JSPs, which they called jamboree shoulder patches, separate issue. And they definitely, thumbed their noses at these event patches. And I think it was Gene Berman, I'm not 100% certain anymore, but I think it was Gene Berman who came up with the acronym SAP for a shoulder activity patch, because only a SAP would buy one. And that's where it came from. And they DSP collectors thumbed their noses at them, but then, the BSA, all the councils realized people were collecting CSPs like crazy. It was hot. And that was where the money was. So, they would put out activity patches, but they shaped them like a CSP, because people would buy them. And of course, the purists said, well, only a sap would buy them, and we're going to call them saps. So, but then that kind of went away, and but it has carried over into the cataloging system of the CSI, which I guess they're going to change it back to CSPs. But the Council Shoulder Insignia books, it's SA or TA. It's an activity patch, but it's always been separate for jamborees, because I think the jamboree people, I think legitimately lots and lots of people collected jamboree patches, but they even though they didn't collect saps, they would collect these JSPs, and so they were collected separately by different groups of people. Of course, there's crossover folks like lots of us on this call that collect all kinds of things, but they just were cataloged separately. And the SAPs and the CSPs were collected together, because people gave up on the notion of we're not going to collect these, because councils were putting out far more of those than they were regular issue CSPs. And then of course FOS CSPs came out, which were all strictly fundraisers, and lots of people don't even collect those at all. But and they're listed differently in the ISCA book and so forth. So it's just the way people collect it. And I think with the proliferation of patches, so many things being made, and the realization that you can't collect everything. We had the discussion last week about how many national collectors of OA there are. Well, there's even fewer people who are trying to do that well, maybe not. There's a handful of people trying to collect, all CSPs. There's a few people that collect all JSPs, but most people are now collecting regionally, and regionally maybe simply my council. And all of those folks, like Larry and the folks that put out this book, I think would, logically speaking, say, look, we should go back to the beginning and try to do these in order from everything that's ever been issued that was put on a shoulder. No matter why it was put on a shoulder, it's on a shoulder. And so it's a shoulder patch, and number them that way. But in many ways, that horse has left the barn. It's really difficult to do at this point to go back and do that, especially to try and figure out, what was the real order that they were actually issued in.
Oh yeah, well we struggled with
there you
that
go.
on recent stuff. But let me ask you, so because you've been doing it since '72, which so you've been kind of, basically kind of since the real beginning of when they really were pushing it out CSPs. So there's some issues, and I know the North Carolina ones, but I don't really know the other ones from around the country. But I know that there are some. But like every East Carolina council early issue CSP that's listed in the book, every one of them, from and they don't even list them all, but there's like 6 different ones. It's like T1 through T6 or something. Every one of those was made for a jamboree. It was made for
Absolutely.
50, 53, and so on.
And that's been an argument since the beginning, because almost all of the what we would call precursor CSPs, the ones that came out before National issued its letter and sent it out to all the councils that had the national samples stapled to them and said, here's what you can order, and these are the acceptable shapes, and so forth and so on, which is considered to sort of be the genesis of the CSP age, is when that came out. I forget, 71, 70, I forget. Anything before that is a precursor CSP, because it's really not a CSP. And almost every one of them was put out for Jamboree. The problem is the rule of the duck has gotten in there. So like with your East Carolinas, they don't say Jamboree on them, even though we know they are Jamboree issues, but they don't say Jamboree. And as a result, people call them CSPs and don't call them JSPs. The famous one from my area up in New England is the Mattituck Council T1, which is it's a 1960 National Jamboree shoulder patch. It's a JSP, but it doesn't say Jamboree anywhere on it. And so it's considered to be a CSP. Well, it came out in 1960. It's well before the CSP era. But rule of the duck, Bronx Valley, another great example, Bronx Valley. It's a, Juniata Valley. I'm sorry?
Chief Sapona.
Yeah, they're all JSPs. but they don't say Jamboree on them. And so the purists call them CSPs, but the really purists, the one who say if it was issued before National sent out its letter, it's really not a CSP at all. They don't count them. So you can, everybody can collect.
That would make a CSP collection a lot easier.
Oh, it would.
To say, yeah, we don't need any of those ones before 1970 or 71 or yeah. That would make it a lot easier.
It would. It absolutely would. So and I've collected and stopped collecting CSPs on several occasions, and it gets harder and harder. And I collect all of the New England ones, and as does Jim Goldrup, and Jim and I have worked on and have been working on since last November a similar effort to this Tuscarora book that I can share my screen to show you one example. But we're trying to do that for every council. But all I'm trying to do is to have a compendium that goes along with CSI, because the guidebook from ISCA has no photos at all. And for obvious reasons, it would take too much space. But if you want to collect and use CSI, it's very difficult to use CSI because it's all text. And you talked about trying to make it easy, Larry. A picture's worth 1,000 words, is the famous saying, and it really is. And so I have a template, but my template is used through Word. I love this idea of using Excel. Now, I wouldn't want to restart my project using an Excel spreadsheet, but the big thing for me is the question of whether if you found something that was a 0.5, as you were talking about, how easy is that to just insert that into the program? If it works really, really quickly and easily, then that's a real improvement over what I have. Because when we find something new, I have to find a place to put it in there, and then that can rejigger, that entire council.
And my understanding is, as limited as it is, my understanding is you create a new row, and basically, the only thing changing is the part that he actually populates, that creates. The history stuff, that doesn't change at all.
But if you put in one patch and you have 2 on each side, you put in a new row, you're going to have a blank.
Well, it's going to move.
It's going to move everything after that one.
Yeah. And so
the question is, how easy is it to do that?
Yeah, and basically my understanding is once you change the Excel spreadsheet, you just have to click to import the data again, and you click to import the images. You're just creating it again. You're creating the whole book again with 2 clicks of a button.
You seeing Daniel Webster Council there now?
Oh yeah.
So this is Daniel Webster, and the format is more. I try to do more images on a page than you guys did. You guys have 6 on a page because you have so much text, and I've tried to do 10 on a page. But of course, some places you've got to put in text boxes. So this is operated off of a Word table. And it's a pre-formatted thing, so I have it as a template, and I just import the pictures and the text. But it's it's like if I needed to put something up here where I'm putting my cursor, and I'd have to put a new row in, and then I would have a blank here, and that's the downside of it. But so this is Daniel Webster Council, and I get into all the varieties and the backgrounds and all of that stuff. So as an example, you see the Scout stuff backing, BSA 2010 backing, the since 1910 backing, and so forth and so on. These are the main CSPs. You keep on going. Differences between fleur-de-lis, so you can see when they put the crossbar in, and then you get into all these SAs, and so here's an example of I found something that I still don't have an image of it, but rather than try to rejigger everything, I just put reserved in. It's a block, just reserved.
Yep.
If it has a blue background like this, it's in my collection. If it has a background other than blue, I don't have it, and neither does Jim. If it has a light blue background, a pale blue background, Jim has it, but I don't. So you can see some examples of ones we don't have. And then, if it's in red, it's not in CSI.
Okay, that's nice. Yeah.
And I try to use their numbering, even though that might not be the right order. That's sort of the hobby accepted order at this point. Keep on going. That was a certificate that came with the Philmont one that year. and so forth and so on, keep on going.
I'll tell you, the only reason we included really, the only reason I pushed to have the ISCA numbering included in our listing was because Mickey collects our council strips, and I know he lists them that way.
Well,
because no one else in our council collects them that uses it. But I knew Mickey did. I said, "Oh no, we got to include it because there might be someone who does."
I understand, and I created this to be used by anybody and everybody, and not just the folks in that particular council, which is it was really intended to be something where if you collect CSPs from New England, even if it's just from this one council, then here's something you can use to help you identify what's in there, and of course there's no JSPs in it because CSI doesn't use JSPs, and my intent was to put a photo for every one of these listings that was in CSI. Plus, I started it when I did because, they came out with the October 2023 update to CSI, and it's missing so much.
Yeah.
And I had never gone through my 2017 to look and see what I had and didn't, what they didn't list. So I said, well, I'll try to give as much information as I can to these guys, and I'll do it in the concept of creating this document. So I've posted all of these files, and I have one for every council in New England that's ever had CSPs, including Mattatuck, even though I call that a JSP. I've posted all of them in the council shoulder strip collectors Facebook group that I administer.